Welcome back to the Torque Test channel, and welcome back to Pushy, our domesticated wrench turner, at times destroyer tube. Pushy has already determined last time when we visited Crescent wrenches that there is a correct way to turn them if you want the best results for durability and slip resistance, which they sometimes even put on the tool confirming this, and determined, man, are adjustable wrench standards hard to hit. ASME tool engineers expect 508 newton meters, 375 foot-pounds out of these tools. Today we see, can any of these actually do that? But mostly, a lot of the testing we do here is to measure slipping. Which tools slip first? Because this is the type of tool you might use on much thinner hexes than we're showing. That might be brass or less than perfect looking malleable iron, black pipe, and tie rods. The tool that makes it further before slipping is not top because you can put hundreds of foot-pounds behind it. It's simply less likely to spill blood from your knuckles than others when turning realistic looking stuff. In that past video, and since you guys have asked us to look at a lot of different brands of adjustable wrenches, when we tally those up, sure, some of them might be sort of on the meme side of sick curiosity, but we figured even if so, that might be fun. And those include options made in the US, like old school Craftsman, and one purchased from Japan just to peek at the famed metric adjustable wrench, and representing another at bat for Bahco. And also a few brands that, if you've been really out of the tool game for a while, you might think are US names, like Pittsburgh. Okay, that one's a stretch, but SK as well. Yeah, the rest of these are mainly made in China, but for less coin. Let's see where they fall. With 8 brands to get to, let's get into it. Starting in order of price, we have Workpro, a $15 adjustable wrench. Expensive versus cheap was a common request, and this is towards the bottom here in available options. It's a 10-inch wrench like the Crescent wrench we've tested previously. This class of tool is segmented into common sizes, which often come with them very similar jaw widths and ranges. We'll point out when that's not the case on the ones we bought today, in which case they'll get dinged for overly chunky or awarded for being slim when they measure 7% or further from the current average. But yeah, one thing that can be annoying about cheaper wrenches like these is the jaw wiggle dance they do. In our minds, this does two things: possibly afford you less grip inherently, and we'll be testing that next, but also when using the tool, repositioning it a bunch of times. The most annoying Crescent wrench is the one that shimmies open to a larger size when you're using it. And I often say Crescent interchangeably with adjustable wrench, but it earns the label here being really poor at this. With the calipers zeroed at the 19mm hex coming off the head of our reverse thread test bolt here, the bolt is tightened up to about where we can, then loosened, repositioning it the same amount of times each. And for the Apex Tool Group owned Crescent made brand in Vietnam, that's 0.85mm over. Not good. You're aiming for 19mm, and in short order, you're going to have in effect a 19.85mm wrench. And removing the link to this tool from our last visit on the subject, it's that bad. The Workpro, well, it's better, but it doesn't feel all that solid. You know the feeling when the jiggle creeps in if you use these. 0.38 or 19.38mm when finished. According to ASME design standards, 10-inch class of adjustable wrenches should be exceeding 508 newton meter, 375 foot-pounds before breaking, which is crazy. But also the rock hard large test hex this is designed to work on is mainly just to break these. We'd rather work up to that on a class 8.8 grade 5 equivalent hex hardware, and eventually ruin them as we move up to larger sizes to see which slips before others. So that's with a 17mm hex here first. Often larger wrenches don't like smaller hexes in my own experience. Depending on the angle of the wrench head, many of these are going to require wood cribbing here to offset them correctly, but all the torque is measured here up at the head. And for the Workpro here, that's 201.9 newton meter or 40% of the ASME design standard before rounding and slipping off what you're working on here. About the same as the Crescent. Let's see if that's any good. Up next is SATA at $17. No one requested this, I'll be honest, but I always see this brand around. Reminds me of SATA, the spray guns, but this one's owned by Apex Tools like Crescent is, though in person they do look much different. The fit and finish, including this rust forming on it, or not including that, leaves some to be desired. Moisture is getting trapped into this paper backing and then oxidizing the ground finish on the handle. And for your troubles, you're left with some easily moving jaws with the same amount of work done here. It quickly feels like a new size, though less here than the other Apex Tools namesake, 0.47mm becoming 19.47mm wrench after snugging in onto the 19. All these so far feel pretty loosey-goosey. It's when we get to that grip though on a 17mm, that slip test, that we really get to see more poor performance from the SATA. 138.3 newton meter, just 27% of the standard before slipping, a new record low. Moving on in price, next we have one of the most requested models Here at $18, we have the new Pittsburgh extendable knuckle remover 5000. This isn't like a 10-inch adjustable wrench. It's more like a 10, 12, 14, or 16-inch wrench, and its jaw size and range reflects that. They are 22% fatter than average. That isn't going to be a clean comparison, but you guys were curious as well, so we are too. Theoretically, as a heavier, bigger wrench, it should run away with things as we progress to larger hex sizes, but on smaller stuff, I try not to use something too large for a reason. We see 194.2. That's not amazing, but not terrible, 38% of the standard. Though we did find the slop in the jaws here results in just 0.21 millimeters over, so it may have some potential. We'll see coming up. And jumping up to $24 now, we have SK. The only time SK has made appearances on this channel, it's been their USA stuff. SK has since been bought out by Great Star out of China, and people aren't happy about that. Pretty much all the one-star reviews about this tool is the fact that it's not made in the USA like most classic SK is, which I do get. But also, maybe it sucks, maybe it doesn't. Its shape is a bit reminiscent of their X-frame wrenches. It's also got some jaw movement they should probably address. Doesn't feel as loose and wiggly as some of the others, but when in use, the jaws open 0.56 to 19.56 millimeter. Not a good stat to be towards the top in. When it comes to jaw performance, when you snug it onto something in order to break it free, it's not bad though. It's going to get 203.7 here, which is slightly above the Workpro, but still matching it percentage-wise with 40%. Okay, and up next we have Tekton, often a great choice for middle-of-the-road pricing, but usually above middle in performance. Here with a price of $25 though, putting it in the upper half of tools, and this was made in China. Was hoping to see a Taiwan example for us today, as most of Tekton's stuff is, but we failed a bit in that effort. Regardless, it feels like a solid piece here, and the jaws open with just 0.16 millimeters worth of slop for the best of the purchases so far today. It also takes a fair amount of turning for it to round over a grade 5 type hex. Keeping in mind this is likely thicker, like wider than the hex you're going to be tackling in real life, so cursing might happen at lower torque levels for each of these we show here, but apples to apples it does pretty well, 211.5, 42% of the standard. We may not have a classic USA-made SK, but we do have a classic USA-made Craftsman, the most requested example to compare our results to. No way to buy a new one of these any longer, but I have a rather full assortment of Craftsman from days past around here, and this is their 44604 10-inch model, which should play the part, and adjusted for inflation would be about $29 today, roughly. If you're ever using a Crescent wrench and it just won't stay the size you adjusted it to, I'm curious if that's an old wrench like US, Swedish, or otherwise, or something made in the modern era, because for example this US click stop is one of my personal favorites to use for this small size because it stays essentially at zero slop, and even this USA Craftsman, which doesn't advertise a set and stop function, just doesn't open much at all. 0.06 millimeters is essentially no bigger than where it started. That's good stuff. And while it's not by a mile, it also impresses on the 17 millimeter here, racking up 221.9 newton meter for 44% and the top spot. Craftsman came to play, it seems, but also not the only US option we brought. Coming up at second highest in price for a full $50, we have this made in the USA Klein Bud wrench, which is a type of adjustable wrench. And usually they have very few downsides, at least in my experience. I found myself using this type of design in plenty of scenarios. They have a tapered handle, which usually means the wrench head itself is smaller per handle size. Like a 10-inch Bud wrench would usually have the head of an 8-inch Crescent wrench, but this Klein, they make the head larger to match, which is nice, and even go a bit overboard. The jaws measure 20% over average in thickness from all the examples so far, and it will get dinged a little for that. The tapered handle allows for easy use with a cheater pipe, or snipe, I guess it would be called in this case, and they even include a through hole at the top, which would be missing in the handle for a lanyard. It's pretty handy. And handy it's going to remain for you after getting banged around. You're not going to be chasing this one's jaws, reining them back into size all the time. I apologize for the glare, but this came in at 0.05 millimeter. Damn good and about matching the Craftsman. Just like we saw with the large jaws on the Harbor Freight, working on somewhat soft but typical smaller size fasteners, it might favor a similarly not so large wrench, as we see the same phenomenon here for whatever reason, just 166.2 newton meter before it loses grip on the 17 millimeter hex. And here we have Bahco. This is its chance at redemption. The brand known for having been the first with an adjustable wrench did very poor for us last time, and that was even buying 2 examples to look at. We couldn't find any Bahco Swedish examples for sale, so we bought the most expensive, $56, in this case 10-inch model we could find that appears to be a foreign market tool, as it only graduates metric measurements, no SAE on the other side, which is blank. Finally found a metric adjustable wrench. We bought this from Japan. It arrived fairly quickly. It still says made in Spain on it, so we may have just spun our wheels a bit trying to find a new country of origin for Bahco with no dice. Though it does feel very nice. The jaws taper narrower but start wider at the bottom, so still fall into the overall average jaw width range. And use of the tool netted us 0.27 millimeters over after the same amount of swings and torque applied. Not bad. 201.8 is what we do get out of this wrench, which is not going to be record breaking, but so far that is 40%. So for all the wrenches so far, that looks like this. Getting dinged here a bit for the jaw loosening up during use, which is annoying, and here for the jaws being wider than average, which can also be annoying when they don't fit in many places. This is where we get to ruining some wrenches. The ASME standard calls for 1 1/8 inch hex to see where they basically fail at. And we're going to be doing that here, but if they don't break here, they'll progress to a 19mm super hard as a rock just to do them in and see if they can put up a number that's even higher or if they're basically done. In these tests is where we start seeing some bigger gaps forming between the tools. So Workpro manages to increase its wrenching ability from 40% up to 356.8 Nm or 70% with a larger fastener. Still not topping Crescent, but also amazingly not broken yet either. It says chrome vanadium right on the side of the wrench, which typically, if they have to advertise the material forged into the side of the tool, they aren't bringing a lot in the reputation category. The SATA is going to just about match that same value with 71% or 358 Nm, but this is where the similar sisters call it a night for the rest of the showing. The large and in charge Pittsburgh does as you'd expect or hope, being a larger head, sort of 12-inch plus class of adjustable, but still impressive to see it not do terribly. A lot of utility in this tool for 18 bucks, 527.9 Nm or 104%. The first to eclipse the standard, but though that standard doesn't really apply to this size of tool. The SK Surprises was ready to talk about what happens when US companies sell to massive foreign corporations, but that'll have to go on the back burner with 429.9 Nm, 85%, and it's still working. It's looking okay. For every yin, there's a yang. The Tekton, which is the most expensive out of the made in China options, is able to muster 373.4 for 74%, which isn't super bad or anything, but it's also the first, but won't be the last wrench to retire from this test. It's now in a stuck position, won't adjust either way, and won't have another shot at a higher score. Craftsman is next. Here's that. So my Craftsman met an unfortunate early demise at 332.6 Nm. The adjustable jaw broke clean off, and it appears to have broken down the spine, which does measure about 20% thinner than most of these here. Off to the great toolbox in the sky in the name of science. The beefy Klein, on the other hand, is happy to see something larger to tackle and takes it head on, putting up the largest numbers of a 10-inch wrench on the day so far, 431.4 Nm, but that does round to the same 85% up top here. Still works very smoothly. Not to be left out, Bahco wants a piece of the action and also targets the same sort of wheelhouse of torque here, 426.4 or 84%. Though that was enough to retire it. This thing is frozen up real good, like even a hammer and pliers won't free up this thumb screw. Bahco steps out of the race a bit early. Which means the super hardened 19mm hex is going in here. There's a few tools who will be missing from this round from not lasting long enough to experience it. The $15 Workpro manages to not be so used at this point that it can't improve its score, and that makes it increase from 70 to 74%. It's a lot like a standard Crescent wrench. The SATA is maxed out for either size, doing near the same as the last test here for 355.4 or 15 Nm lower in fact. Not able to improve. Its jaws are, as a result, no longer going to go into some positions, mainly sizes under what it was just tested at, a bit too marred up to move. Similar story for the Pittsburgh in that it also is not able to improve. It prefers larger hardware given its larger frame, but not bad, 501.5 here, down from 528, and it's also not broken, still seems to work after getting its battle scars here. SK has been impressive on Pushy today. It's able to match or just slightly increase its peak torque here by 1 Nm for the same 85%, unchanged, and also one of the few still working at the end of the day. Gotta say, I didn't call that. And the last wrench to make it here, all the others bowed out before this Klein, it's not playing around. You won't always or even often be on a fastener as solid and unwilling to round over as a hardened hex to ASME standards, but if you ever see something similar like grade 8 or above, this wrench will top every other here by not a small amount. 552 is the max the digital output is set up for here, and so that's where it's going to get turned off, but it will still exceed 100% for the first time we've seen out of any 10-inch adjustable. It took some spending and some thick boy jaws to do it, but it's having no trouble still operating as usual after all this as well, completely unfazed. That is good stuff. And that also looks like all of this. If you add how all these performed with these percentages of ASME standard as points across here, that totals 174.5 for Workpro, SATA 157 and a quarter, that's not great, 218.75 for Pittsburgh, SK 196, Tekton 186, Craftsman bowed out early, so had less of a shot at a high score, 172.5, 206.75 for Klein, and 201.25 for the metric Bahco. Which, just first glance here, the Pittsburgh numerically gonna be on top, which is to say, it doesn't suck. If you have fasteners 3/4 of an inch and up and you're targeting those, this thing will work well, and I even like extendo ratchets, so why not an extendo knuckle mutilator? Not mad at it, but won't be going on our 10-inch adjustable wrench ranking here for obvious reasons, which leaves Klein in first with 206.75. With those jaws and a similar boat, prefers 19mm 3/4 inch and above, which is, as a bud wrench, probably not usually a problem. I see a lot of larger stuff that this would be useful on, like air and hydraulic lines. The Bahco, which just did well all around, including some smaller stuff, much better than their 8072R model. At least that thing is quite rough these days, and surprisingly, SK, if they work on jaw fitment, this could even compete with the higher ones towards the top here, but all said, is a wrench that doesn't easily slip off a bolt head and is still alive and kicking today. With this list, you can pick the attribute that's most important to you and see which did best. That's how we recommend looking at most of these. Now, not all of us are going to be as strong and consistent as Pushy, but when your hardware doesn't look as perfect, doesn't look as thick, or as hard as what we test, some of these might afford you a better chance at not applying a blood undercoat treatment to the bottom of your vehicle when you're working on it. Appreciate you joining us for this one. We make episodes every Friday. Click some buttons below if you've made it this far, and thanks for watching.